Hi, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Ann Gordon. I'm the deputy editor of the Ops and Blogs of the Times of Israel. And today, right in the middle of Women's History Month, we're speaking with Blu Greenberg. Blu is an American writer specializing in modern Judaism and women's issues. She is well known for her book on women in Judaism, A View from Tradition. She's well known for her book, How to Run a Traditional Jewish Household. And more recently, and in a different vein, Black Bread, Poems After the Holocaust. In 1973, she gave the opening address at the first National Jewish Women's Conference. She has chaired the first and second international conferences on feminism and orthodoxy. She is the founder and first president of JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. And in the year 2000, she received the Women Who Made a Difference Award from the American Jewish Congress Commission for Women's Equality. Welcome, Blu.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Blu, when I first met you, it was the summer of 1991. This goes back some time. It was a program, a summer camp program. And at the time you came and you spoke to my staff and you predicted then that we would see women Orthodox rabbis in our day. And people were pretty skeptical. I think we can safely say, even if plenty of people still think that Orthodox and women rabbis are contradictions in terms, that you were right and they were wrong. We'll come back to that soon. First, I'd actually like to ask you to give us a bit of background. You've been in the public eye as an Orthodox feminist activist for a long time. What got you started? What made you do things differently and want to do things differently from the norms of then?
So I think, first of all, I'll just tell you parenthetically, somebody made me $1 million bet that I would be wrong, that there would not be women rabbis in my lifetime.
Have you collected? Are you going to collect?
5 years after he made the bet, he called me one morning with great agitation. This was around the year 2000. Very agitatedly, he called me and said, I didn't really mean that bet. I was just kidding. I said, don't worry, Michael, it's okay.
You can't hold them to it.
So what made me, it was, I guess, a convergence of factors. Feminism was on the horizon. It was not only on the horizon, it had well arrived. In the early 1962, my husband was coming back from one of his lecture travels, and he picked up the feminine mystique in the airport and brought that back. I was as far from feminism as, I don't want to make any disparaging comments right now, but I was very far from the ideas and ideals of feminism. I was very comfortable where I was as an Orthodox Jewish wife and mother. And I read the book, and it was somewhat aggressive in my eyes. It was somewhat hostile, but there was a white hot truth in that book that you just could not deny. And so I watched from the sidelines, and I didn't join immediately. I didn't join the movement immediately, and I didn't join the rallies, but I was engaging the movement, the ideals. And, I came to see the truth of the problems and the truth of the idea of gender equality and the justice of gender equality. So in other words, I came to feminism intellectually, not out of feeling disadvantaged. I had all the advantages as the wife of a beloved rabbi in a wonderful community, and as a mother and as a professional. I was teaching at the time. Towards the end of the 60s, Jewish women began to weigh in on Jewish feminism. Maybe it was earlier than that, but that was when I began to read what was going on in women's minds. Again, I didn't become part of that early phase, but little by little, I started to write a little bit, and I was very supportive. And I again saw the truth. And then in late 1972, I was invited. I was actually teaching at a liberal arts college, which was really a Catholic college founded by Sisters of Charity. And but they called themselves a liberal arts college because they could only get a funding that way, an all-girls college. And I was invited to, two women visited me who were working on a conference. And it was the first National Jewish Women's Conference that you mentioned. And they asked me if I would give a presentation at the conference, if I would give the keynote address at the conference. I didn't know anything about the conference, and but I said yes. And the next day they called and said to me, well, they had to rescind the invitation because somebody else had invited Dr. Trudy Weiss Rosemary. I'm telling you this long story because it was serendipitous or bashert that this is how I would be pulled into a turning point in my life. The reason at any rate, why did they invite me? They had come to invite my husband to participate in the conference, to be on a panel on Sunday morning. The conference was over Shabbat. At one point, I went up to put my youngest daughter, Gudi, to bed, and we had just gotten the new recording of the Shema Yisrael, the Hasidic folk festival in Israel every year. I don't know if they still have that, put out this recording. And so I said to her, let's sing the new Shema, Gudi. And we did. And then as I'm leaving in the room, I hear this little whisper behind me. Now, Ima, can we say the real Shema? So I did what any decent Jewish mother would do. I went down and told these two visitors sitting in my room who were there to invite my husband, this chokhmah of my 5-year-old. And that's when they invited me, just on the spur of the moment. So when they called me the next day to take back the invitation, I wasn't surprised. Anyhow, and I said, yes, I'll give a workshop. That's what they had, that was the changed invitation. 2 weeks before the conference, they called again to say Trudy Weiss Rosemary backed out of the conference. Trudy Weiss Rosemary at that time was probably the most eminent Jewish female scholar leader in the community. And so she backed out. The reason they recalled off the invitation the first time is that she didn't want to appear on the panel with a neophyte like me. So that's why they disinvited me. And so I said, I'll do the workshop. And then she changed her mind again and said she didn't want to participate in the conference altogether. And would I mind giving the keynote? And I said, yes. And I had 2 weeks to go. And I remember I canceled 2 of my classes at Mount St. Vincent and worked on the speech because I had not really read the literature. I didn't know, I hadn't planned to give a major talk on the subject. And although I had studied many of the halachot concerning women sporadically over the course of my life and had read somewhat in the late 60s, a bit of what was going on in conservative and reform Judaism, I really didn't have a good grasp of it and how it related to me and how it related to Orthodox women. And then I gave the talk, which was a 2-pronged analysis of how feminism was good for the Jews and how feminism was not so good for the Jews, and that Jewish values would be good for feminism. And that conference changed my life. The talk, and which made me start to think about these issues, looking at the material, looking at the data, and the experience of what I called from then on the cohort of Jewish feminists changed my life the very next day. So, and that's the path I've been on. That's how I serendipitously got into Jewish feminism, Jewish Orthodox feminism.
I want to ask, at that time, as you were coming into this from a background, maybe more from the secular feminism, right? If you're talking about the feminist mystique, then my question is, did you see at that time any contradictions? Like nowadays, there seems to be a great deal of oh, I don't know, struggle for a lot of people, a lot of women who are trying to live in the modern world and also trying to live a traditional Jewish lifestyle, and then a frustration when they don't align necessarily in terms of values. And of course, then other people come and say, oh, everything aligns, everything is fine. And I feel like that juncture is exactly where your work has been.
So I think that it's not everything does not align, but if you look at what has happened over the last 50 years, 50 years is really the blink of an eye is Jews count time. It's incredible what has happened in the last 50 years. I would say during the last 50 years, I myself have been surprised at some of the things that have taken place that I never imagined. Some of the gains and some of the ways women express their feelings for Judaism, for Yiddishkeit, and also their identity as women and their desire for access. So when I came into feminism, I think actually in that talk, I'm not sure if I did or not, I can't remember, but certainly in presentations afterwards, I identified 7 areas in which I felt there needed to be repair and adjustments. And when I look at 6 of those areas, or 5 of those areas, there's been tremendous change. There's really, women have access, learning.
Can I ask what those 5 are?
Yeah.
Can you tick them
So
off? Or a few of them?
Learning is certainly the most significant one, I believe. Learning, which leads to leadership, but women didn't have access to leadership because they didn't have access to the texts that entitle one to be certified as a leader in Judaism. And the rabbinical degree is tied to learning. But women began to learn even if they weren't going for smicha, and even if they didn't have a goal at the end of it.
I know it well. I did that course of learning.
Yeah, you were a Drisha scholar?
I spent about close to 10 years in full-time Beit Midrash study.
Wow.
In various places, because each one kind of tapped out at a certain point. Now there are more advanced programs than I was, I can't put my whole life on hold now and go back to the Beit Midrash, but there are times I would like to. But I feel like there are a lot of women who are really very learned out there whose scholarship sometimes even exceeds anything that the formal programs are offering, because they've been learning, people who have kept at it for now 20 years, 30 years. Thank God. But you had more. You said you had 5 areas that you saw.
Yeah. So the learning, and of course the leadership, all these rabbinic programs and titles, and I think titles are very important. Credentials, I call them. And, I spoke a lot about it in the early 2000s to other women, but I didn't follow it myself. And probably if I was 20 years younger, I probably would have gone through a smicha program too. So learning, leadership, life cycle ceremonies, that in the 70s, when I began to address that issue, there were no, bat mitzvah was not a phenomenon in the Orthodox community.
Okay, and that's a big change.
It's a big change. And when I was growing up actually in Seattle, Washington, if you said the word bat mitzvah, it meant you were a member of the Baron de Hirsch Reform Temple, and you were beyond the pale as far as Orthodoxy was concerned. And we never thought twice. We went to our friends' bar mitzvahs and never thought twice. Simchat Bat, the first one I think took place in 1973, and that's actually been, interestingly, that hasn't caught on as much as no self-respecting Orthodox family would not have a bat mitzvah for their daughter, but most families still do not have Simchat Bat, and I'm not sure why. It's such a beautiful idea, the covenantal ceremony for a baby, for an infant, but I guess that'll take more time. So learning leadership life cycles.
To reassure you, I do know of many families, Orthodox families, serious, rabbinic, even Orthodox families that do have Simchat Bat.
I think the more learned families do.
Oh, interesting.
And, the daughters of rabbis, somehow they are, they're, I'm not sure how that works, but, and then there's learning the liturgy, which was tefillah. I went to yeshiva high school and to a yeshiva graduate school, and they had nothing. When I was at the College of Mount St. Vincent, it was my first experience with women's prayer, which was at 12:30 every day. All the nuns gathered in a large room and had communal prayer, group prayer. I never seen women praying in a group until I was at the Catholic University. And now women take tefillah much more seriously. I went to Central Yeshiva High School. The boys who went to Talmudical Academy, which was the brother school at Yeshiva University, they had tefillah when they got to school. And the girls, we didn't have tefillah in any of the girls' high schools in my day. So, and then just in general, women went on Shabbat morning late, and on Chagim, if they didn't have babies to mind at home. And now it's a whole different engagement of tefillah, personal tefillah, and personal, private, and communal tefillah. And of course, women's tefillah, the partnership minyanim, all those have made a new focus on women and prayer. Although I want to say in fairness that I think the Haredi community, women devoted time to tefillah, even in those years when the modern Orthodox women did not. I think that was a feature of Haredi Jewish life. Okay, liturgy, life cycle ceremonies, legal testimony, that has not really changed, and with women qualified for a dut. On the other hand, it's an issue that's come up in terms of women officiating, in rabbinical roles. So that's probably it's going to be interesting to see how that is resolved. Right now, a woman in an official role has to make sure to have a male witnesses standing in for her whenever witnessing is required. And of course, the last one is divorce, the whole issue of divorce and the aguna. There are so many organizations working on this issue, and there have been so many conferences and papers and books and attention, and starting from the hand-wringing stage, which was acknowledging the problem, and the shul shunning, and the prenuptial agreement, and in the 80s, and then the Rachman Beit Din and the opposition to it in the 90s, and organizations like ORA, the Center for Women's Justice, or the first organization in Brooklyn was GET, G-E-T, Get Equal Treatment. So, and the rallies, and the attention to the issue, and the JOFA conferences, and the Aguna, rallies in front of people's homes, Ma'aganim's homes, the home of the Ma'agan or business place. And on the other hand, there's still, thousands of Agunot that come through the system, and they're not Agunot because they pay. That's why they're not. And that's totally reprehensible. So it's very disheartening to see that. But on the other hand, I am hopeful. I'm more hopeful now because in the year 2010, I came to this realization that really little substantive has changed. I was preparing a paper for the JOFA conference in 2010. And my hypothesis was, look how much has changed over the last 40 years. And I would work on my paper and cite all of these things that I just told you about. And then at night I would go on to GetLink, which was a link, what do you call that? An internet group, an international conversational group, and hear these horrible stories and the search for men who had a band deserted their wives 10 and 15 and 20 years ago. And it was a very discombobulating experience. And so by the time I finished my paper, I said, this is it. I'm leaving this issue. Nothing's changed really. But then I don't remember even the circumstances. I sort of got pulled back into the issue, and over Shabbat lunch, the idea of holding a conference just on the solutions that existed in the tradition, which we could, Jofa and New York University, Joseph Weiler, who was head of the law school at New York University. I forget now his formal title. I think he was dean of the law school. And we convened this conference. Rabbi Gerald Blitstein, alav shalom, wrote the paper assessing all of these non-get solutions, all of these solutions that would set aside a marriage, retroactively declare the marriage as non-existent, never having taken place. And from there, the next year we created the Beit Din, or I should say the day after, we started the process of building the Beit Din, opened the doors a year later in 2014. And the idea is that a get should always be the method or the document that ends a Jewish marriage. But if it's not forthcoming, there are other solutions, systemic solutions in the halachic system that can be used. And in the face of the great injustice that is done to Jewish wives, these have to be used. So the International Beit Din does, its clients are women who have suffered greatly. Many suffered domestic violence. Certainly they've suffered a break on their lives, for years and years. Their children suffer. And the Beit Din has found ways to release the overwhelming majority of women who come to its doors. Now, over 150 women at this point, probably waited. The last calculation I made was maybe 5 years ago, that the total number, no, not 5 years ago, probably two years ago, was that the total number of years that the women who came to the court had waited was over 400 years.
Oh my. Oh my.
So 100, and so it was at that time about 120 women. So they Beit Din, which I've been heavily involved in during the last 8 years, has freed, I think it's 154 women to date, and a third of them with a get, a third of them with a patur, which is halachic patur, releasing them from the marriage or declaring the marriage not valid at its origins. And a third of them, now it's probably less, it's probably 40, 20, and 20% of them helping agunot through the batei din in their own community. And that's been very effective, and to get a get in the Beit Din in their own community, which they wouldn't have got, which they waited for a long time, and it never happened. So that's what our dayanim are, really brilliant, wonderful, and compassionate. And
so I want to use this discussion of the International Beit Din, which I know is basically, it's international, but it's centered in America, right? I want to segue from that because we're now having this interview in Israel, and I know you are a recent Ola, and I'm curious how I use it as a segue because I know that the issues of marriage and divorce in the state of Israel, where it's a state mandated kind of issue as compared to religious
right.
divorce in the United States, is not at all a state issue. So I want to shift from this and ask you about your experience as an Ola and how you have found all of this, Judaism, feminism, Orthodoxy, to be different or the same in Israel versus America, because it's certainly a hot topic, right? We're so enmeshed, the two communities and the rest of the world as well are so enmeshed. Anything Israel is enmeshed with the rest of the world. And yet there is much to say, I think, about where they are different.
Right. So they are, you described that better than I could. And I totally agree with your description. The way I've always looked at America and Israel on all issues, and certainly in this divorce issue, but on all the feminist issues, is I see it as a sort of a tandem walk. Sometimes America moves ahead in a particular area, and then Israel is a little behind, and then Israel moves ahead, and so forth. It's kind of that, that's tandem. I don't know how you say tandem in Hebrew, but it's
Maybe with serugin,
what?
alternating. Maybe serugin, alternating.
How do you say that in Hebrew?
I don't know if that. There's
No.
so many ways of saying things in Hebrew. My Hebrew is good and sometimes creative, but I would say serugin, like it's alternating from one to the next.
Right. So the problem in Israel is far greater than it is in America, but because every person has to go through the Beit Din, and the study at the Rachman Center study, which was originally done in preparation for the JOFA NYU conference, showed that 1/3 of all women who were in the sample survey, which was a generous sample and a very respectable survey company, 1/3 of all women who go through the system are blackmailed for a get. And the reason they're not waiting years and years is they pay. And at a subsequent conference, I learned that the Dayanim feel bad about this, and they see their role as getting a better deal. That's how they see their help for women. In other words, they see their role as reducing the cost of the get.
Uh-huh.
So, and that means locked into the idea that a get is the only way that a solution can. Now, I want to just correct one thing, and maybe you'll edit this, what I said before. That was too harsh to say nothing has happened, because a lot has happened. A lot of work has gone on. It's just that from the perspective that I have now, which is how the problem has to be solved systemically in halakha, and not through a prenuptial agreement, and not through a postnuptial agreement, and not through a rally, and et cetera. And it will put all of these organizations out of business if the Batei Din will take seriously.
I think they would be just as happy. I think
Yes,
that
I
would
think
be
so.
fine.
I do
They'll
too.
find other areas that need attention.
I think they
I would
will.
like. I would actually like to ask you about that. I understand that the Aguna issue, the recalcitrance regarding divorce, is, I would say, this looming issue in terms of what needs to be done. My question is, are there other areas that you see, despite all this progress that you've already outlined, where would you like to see more progress? What would you like to see happen going forward? If there are now, and I said we'd come back to talk about women rabbis, there are now women who are completing courses of study that give them a title and presumably a good body of knowledge. As Orthodox rabbis, I think, are particularly knowledge-based, which is not always right.
Yeah.
I would say that the pastoral care that happens in the conservative reform movement is less the role of many Orthodox rabbis, obviously not all. So my question is, with all this, now what do you see happening next? Where would you like to see these new roles for women, the new strides taken, over the past 50 years? If 50 years is a blip, what's the next 50 years?
Well, I think we're in process. I think we're in progress. And I would say that in a certain sense, what's going on inside the Orthodox community, the pattern of progress, it bodes very well for the future. In fact, I can't think of an area specifically that would be actually very new to look at. But all the areas are moving forward and taking a little more time in some and a little less time in others. I think that certainly the women in politics has been moving along quite nicely. It's quite amazing to me how many women are entering the political stream. the uh, the pandemic has highlighted two things about women's vulnerability, which is their in employment and in their pay scale. And more women are re-entering poverty. And I think women in poverty is a very serious issue. But there's one issue that has been, it's not an Orthodox feminist issue, but for me, it's been very, I don't know what the word to use is. It's heartbreaking. And that is, and I don't think that JOFA or any of the other Jewish women's organizations, because of probably partly overload of looking internally, have addressed it. And that is the suffering of women from sexual violence, from rape. It's still a major problem all around the world. And women victims of war, women as victims, particularly in war. So what I would like to see more of is that even though our plate is full with our internal issues, that Orthodox women become involved in more global issues concerning women. And there are many women, Ruth Halpern Kadari, for example, she's very active in the UN. She'd be have you interviewed her? She'd be a good person to interview.
I will pass this along.
It's very interesting. And it has to be a worldwide resolution, and women are so disadvantaged in so many other places. And we can't do everything, we can't do all of everything, but we can do a little of other things. And women's suffering in other communities, we can't be bystanders altogether. Even if we just simply contribute to women's organizations that are active in these areas, in undeveloped countries particularly, or not, it's not even undeveloped countries. I say women suffer abuse on a much larger scale than men do all over the world.
I think that's true. To our great chagrin, I think that's true. I have a question that it's a personal question. It's an observation that I have made over my own perspective in the shifts in Orthodoxy. I like to say I came of age in what I call the golden age of modern Orthodoxy, when one could take halacha very seriously, learn seriously, pray seriously, all of these things that you're addressing, and still be, very serious in commitment to halacha and so on. And now, I would say, 20, 30 years later, I see that there's much more, at least it seems to me, that there's a much more polarizing effect, and that there are people who are, if you're really serious, then you won't do those things. You won't learn, you won't daven with a minyan, you won't, right? There's a certain amount of, like, if you're liberal, you do those things. And if you're really religious, then you're going to end up being, more towards the Haredi spectrum. And this, part of the reason I ask this is I'm a co-founder of the organization Chochmat Nashim, and one of the topics that we have been addressing now for 6-7 years, really going on 8 years, is what we call erasing women. This phenomenon in the Orthodox world of, and it's not just the Haredi world anymore, where you have, on the one hand, it's like it seems to be that there's a pushback against women's involvement in religious Jewish life by saying we're going to excise not only women's involvement from religious Jewish life. Obviously, people are still doing things on the ground, but their images are not present in newspapers, in books, in advertisement, and certainly not in terms of the community at large in a public way. So would be very interested to hear your take on this. I don't know, this flip-flop, seesaw, something that's going on that I think is not the golden age of anything in the society. And I think that also, when this comment that you made about people being involved in the rest of the world, I feel like there's a danger of that becoming like, that's a liberal cause. That's not what the rest of orthodoxy will do. That's not what right-wing orthodoxy will do. Only those liberal, bleeding heart liberals, pardon my sarcasm, but right, bleeding heart liberals who are actually going to care about these more global issues when we have so much to focus on at home.
So I'll say two things. First of all, you expressed that very, very well, and I guess I'm I'm more comfortable probably than you are with this phenomenon, because I do think that there is room for distinctive but equal roles, and that's what this is about. That you can have equality and you can have distinctiveness of roles, and not everything has to be identical. And it took me a while to come to that, partly because I was being challenged by very reasonable people, and not everything that's available is desired, and women don't want always to. And I do think that there is a, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost inchoate sensibility in terms of women and nurture. Now, I think it's an amazing phenomenon that so many men have taken over nurturing roles, but still the primary model is women and family roles. So I am very heartened by the fact that there's a lot of sharing of responsibility, household and raising children, and modern Orthodox couples, totally different from when I was a young mother, and I had a husband who was had 2 or 3 jobs and traveled a lot. And the truth is that until we had 5 young children, and until he took his 3rd position, we shared a lot of the responsibilities. And then I think women, this revolution, this is such a fundamental revolution, the feminist revolution. It's like, it's hard for me to believe that it happened so fast, and that people have accepted, different roles and responsibilities and self-perceptions and what's possible. It's not just the way Jews count time, it's the way anybody counts time for a social revolution. So we probably have to wait for another 50 years or 60 or years until the dust settles, then we see what the patterns are. But right now, I feel it should be, if people want to go at a different speed and choose a different, we should not. The nice thing about feminism is that it's about choice, and there shouldn't be looking at those older models or the original models of male and female, with a critical eye. We should say this is part of the process of society grappling with gender equality, which was for thousands of years didn't even enter into the consciousness. Not done, it wasn't debated, it just didn't enter into anybody's consciousness. So I'm comfortable with that. As long as it's free choice, this is what, and women aren't put back into, the kitchen or whatever, the doghouse sometimes. And women are not, dependent on a man for a divorce if they want out of a marriage. As long as we're past those kinds of issues, it's fine.
Okay. I wanted to ask you one final question, I guess, because I think that our time is coming to an end. I would say, if you were coming of age now, right, what path would you carve out for yourself? The way you've described the serendipity of how you encountered what became a lifelong career and cause, is, I understand we can't account for serendipity, but if you were planning, if you were now, finishing college, whatever, where would you go? What would you do? What would you see for yourself?
Right. So you're actually asking the right person, because when I graduated high school, I didn't even think of multiple choices for college. Everybody in my class went to Brooklyn College, except for one who went to Radcliffe. So first of all, I would take my career my learning and my career more seriously. And I was going simultaneously. When I went to Brooklyn College, I went simultaneously to Teachers Institute at Yeshiva University, and which was actually, they gave a degree. Oh, they gave a Bachelor of Religious Education degree. And then after I was married, I moved to Boston to Waltham with my husband, and I was teaching Hebrew school. And then when I came back to America, I was teaching Hebrew school, and then he was invited to teach at this Catholic university in our community. He was the rabbi of the community, and that was the proclamation of the ecumenical Nostra Aetate, was that Jews should now be teaching Catholics about Judaism. And so you followed your husband in his career. There were two women in my Central Yeshiva High School class who actually had thought through what they wanted to do. One became a doctor and one became a lawyer. And other than that, out of probably 50 girls who graduated, I think we were not directed. I was just very fortunate that I went to Israel from TI, because my sister had done that the year before from Herzliya Hebrew High School. And it was a very important year for me, because I would say it was my first stirring of ambition. It's not that I didn't have ambition. I thought I wanted to go to, when I was in college, I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to work as a mole in the State Department. That was my fantasy. I would work for Israel in the State Department. But it wasn't, I didn't take myself seriously. And when I went to Israel, Nechama Leibowitz was my teacher. And I actually remember towards the end of the program, I wanted to stay in Israel for another year. My plan was, I was going to be her misharetet. She was traveling around the country teaching groups, and I was going to travel with her and carry her books and her bags. And I wrote to my parents that I wanted to stay another year, and I told my friends that's what I wanted to do. And everybody said it's a ridiculous idea, come home, finish college and get married. And my cousin, who was a year younger than I, was in Israel at the same time. And he said he wanted to stay a second year to learn. And they just showered praise all over him. And of course, he did stay another year. So, today I would say, no, I'm staying. I'm going to spend a year with Nechama Leibowitz, learning from her. So that's what I would do. I would be serious about my learning and about my career. And I would put together a career and family package, as I see so many young women doing today, like yourself. And it's possible. In my early writings, I wrote about that the feminist movement is not taking the family seriously and actually, casting aspersions on the family. I remember I once went to a lecture at Barnard, and this woman said that she felt women should be paid for work in the home. And I was really surprised to hear her say that, but it was a novel idea. And then she said, she said, women should not be paid for working in the home. That's what she said. And I was surprised that she said that, because she was very prominent feminist. And then she gave her reason. You know what her reason was? Take a guess why women should not be paid for working in the home.
Because somebody has to do it. It has to happen anyway.
No, she said because it would encourage women to take up family roles in the home.
Oh, well, that's a strong feminist reason.
That's right.
It's unfortunate, I think.
It is.
I'm with you. If people want to stay home, they should be encouraged to do what they're choosing.
Right.
The financial means are there. Why not?
Exactly. And the truth is that, and I was thinking to myself as I sat there, here, all these young, pink-cheeked Jewish young women getting a poisonous idea that it's bad to choose roles in family and home and household roles. But I see, as I say, I think maybe more in the Orthodox community than anywhere else, this amazing combination of women, and with the help of their husbands and with the involvement and understanding of their husbands, putting together very rich careers and raising lots of children. It's quite amazing to me to see this. And Israel, you see it everywhere. You see this is the work ethic and the family ethic. And it's a struggle, because you can't be two people at once, and you can't be two places at once. But they do it. I marvel at these women modeling this. But I also marvel at the women who choose, not just only to raise their children. I have to say, my daughter-in-law, who's a ceramicist, and has 7 children. And her priority is her children, but she does the most beautiful, and she does chesed. You know, she's one of those spectacular models, and all of my children have these combinations. So it's a new time, it's a new age. So I would do a lot of things differently. That's the basis of what I'm telling you. I would certainly do. And
Well,
I struggled, actually, I struggled in those years because I would sit in my office and think somebody else is taking the kids off the school bus today. You know, somebody who worked for me is taking the kids off, you know, and I would want to be at the school bus to hear everything. The news is spilled out of the bus. And then I'd be at the school bus and thinking I should really be working on my grading my papers or something, you know. So I did have much more tension than I think women have today.
well, I think
Even
people have the. I think the many roles that people play. I don't think that the pandemic has helped at all. You know, I think that the tension is there, but I think, Blue, that you have provided my generation with a tremendous role model, frankly, of somebody who did and does combine a priority of family and a priority of everything else. And I don't think it's I don't take lightly, you know, the accomplishments that you have done. I always say, I say I'm privileged to not have to call myself a feminist because I am standing on the shoulders of those who went before. So I thank you on behalf of everybody who's come after you. And I'm so glad that you are able to talk with us today. I am very reluctant to end the conversation, except for that we must. And I hope that we have opportunity to continue it, you know, not just behind the scenes on at the Times of Israel, but you know, as we go forward. Anyway,
great.
thank you
I
for
would
joining us
like
today.
that very much. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you and meeting you again. Wow.
And on behalf of everybody here, I think that your perspective is so welcome, and I thank you for sharing it.
Thank you. Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Bye, Kasher v'Sameach.